Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today I'm going to show you how I've set up my in-home streaming to stream from my gaming PC to any device. So my Odin 2, my Steam Deck, other devices as well, and hopefully I can show you how to set it all up for you as well and get everything all working. If you haven't already watched my previous video on why I think that streaming is the future, then I suggest you check that out first for some context. And just to clarify some points that came out of that video, I'm talking about local in-home streaming. So not remote streaming where you don't have those games, you don't own those games and all of that. These are games that you actually own. So think of Steam, think of EA, think of Ubisoft, games that are on those services that you own, and we're going to be streaming those games to any of your devices. So my Odin 2, Steam OLED, whatever it is that you want. You can even do this with emulation too. That's the whole idea. Just stream your gaming PC to a device. So check out that video first, but for everybody else, let's just jump right in because this is what you're here for. First and foremost, you're going to need a computer. Of course, I have my main PC with an i5 13600K and an RTX 3080. But whatever you have will work, as long as you're aware that your PC will be your limitation for how good games will look and play. Shocking, I know. The next part is something I'd say is basically mandatory, but your computer should be hardwired. You can try it with a Wi-Fi connection, but I would say that you're gonna have a bad time if your host PC isn't wired. Before you turn off the video, let me talk about a few ways you can accomplish that. First, if you're in a house that's wired for phone lines, check to see if they're Cat5e. And if they are, it's as simple as changing the termination to an Ethernet one, and then adding a switch where they all connect. Usually that's in your basement or mechanical room or wherever your router is. Anybody can do this. There's lots of tutorials online because who uses home phones anymore? Another alternative is something called Mocha adapters. And these connect through the coax jacks that you use for your TV when you used to have cable. Put one in the room where your computer is and one where it ends, so in your basement or where your router is, and connect them to your network and boom, really good wired internet. It won't be as good as straight hardwired, but it's much better than power over Ethernet adapters, wireless repeaters, and all of that. Please, if you're using repeaters or power over Ethernet adapters, do yourself a favor and just move on. They're awful. Mocha adapters, in my experience, are second only to actual wired, in my opinion. I've used them in the past and would highly suggest them, even if they're on the more expensive side. There's more to these methods, of course, but that's the gist to help you start your search. Tangent aside, your computer is now hooked up through wired to the internet, and I would hope that you have some sort of wireless network coverage as well. Now, the speed from your internet service provider doesn't mean a single thing for in-home streaming. Nothing. It doesn't matter if you have gigabit or 10 megabytes per second. In-home streaming utilizes your internal network. You can disconnect your internet service provider and this will all still work. So for that, if you ended up adding network drops like I mentioned before, I would add an access point somewhere if you live in a larger house or a multi-floor house. They're not that expensive. The TP-Link EAP 245 or the EAP 650 are two examples of models that I personally use at different price points in my house. And that will give you full network signal at the part of the house that you put it in. It doesn't repeat the signal, it gets the full signal since you're wired and broadcasts it, as if you had a router at that spot. Or if you have one router that covers you, use that. But if you're in a multi-level home, one won't be good enough depending on the area you're in and where you usually play. Honestly, you should just have good internet coverage in your house. It's 2023, just do it. Skip a handheld purchase and just fix your internet. Okay, so all of that aside, you have your computer connected through Ethernet and you have good Wi-Fi signal in your house. Let's move on to software. We're going to need a few things, but let's start simple and download a program called Sunshine. This is going to be the program that creates the connection between your PC and the device that you want to stream to. Head to the GitHub link in my description and click Show All Assets on the latest post. Then click the Sunshine Windows Installer .exe file to download it. Go through the entire setup process with everything as default and just click Next until you finish. Once it's all installed, open a browser and type in localhost:47990. Or you can find it in the taskbar and right-click and open Sunshine. It might say that your connection isn't private. Click Advanced and you can proceed to localhost. It's all fine. Now you can set up a username and password and log in. Don't forget to save the login information, you're gonna need it. So now we're in the interface, and right now there isn't anything we need to do at this moment, but your connection should work already. An easy way to check is head to the Play Store on the device you're streaming to and download and install Moonlight. I'm assuming an Android device here, but the Steam Deck uses the same thing, and I can't speak to other operating systems, but I'm pretty sure that Moonlight is everywhere now. Open Moonlight, and you should see your PC with a lock icon on it. Click it, and it'll give you a pin. Back in Sunshine, under the Pin tab, you want to enter the pin there. That syncs the two and creates a connection. Back out to the main menu of Moonlight, and click the Settings cog top left. For video resolution and frame rate, you want to make sure both match the device you're using. So I have an Odin 2, and that's 1080p and 60 Hz, so I'm going to set both. This part is important, as not doing this will just cause stutters and bad input lag issues. Next up is video bitrate, and this is going to completely depend on your connection. I can usually set mine to max, as my network has that capability, but you're going to have to play around with this on your end. See how far you can push it and test. For right now, you can leave it at the default 20 megabytes per second, but your picture might be a little bit grainy when you first test, so you'll want to change this at some point. A lot of the rest of these options are personal preference, like if you have a speaker system connected and all of that. However, one setting that I recommend you toggle, especially if you're using a device that uses the Nintendo layout, is flip face buttons. This makes it so that it flips the buttons so it'll act as an Xbox controller for streaming, which for a lot of people is likely a lot better than the Nintendo layout, especially if you're playing a lot of PC games. I would turn off optimized game settings if that's on here. We don't use GeForce Experience at all, and we don't want it changing anything. If you're using a device that supports higher refresh rates, you can check to allow that here as well. Make sure the codec is set to automatic, and if you're using a device that supports HDR, you can check that here too. Just be aware that it's experimental. Lastly, to test your setup, and probably for the first few days or so you use this program, I'd suggest turning on Show Performance Stats while streaming. It'll give you good information about what's happening during the stream, so you know whether to make adjustments. Now, in case you've just tuned me out and went to go play games, let me mention a few things. First, you want your monitor to match your device's resolution and frame rate. Meaning, if you're playing on an Odin 2, you want the monitor to do 1080p 60. This can be pretty annoying if you're playing on a higher refresh rate monitor or a higher resolution, like I normally do, or I assume that most people watching will do. The best and easiest solution is a dummy HDMI. I'll leave a link in the description to the one I bought. It was like $5 and it's set up as perfect 1080p 60, which is exactly what we want here. A dummy HDMI is exactly as it sounds. It plugs into the HDMI of your video card, and it mimics being a monitor that you just can't see. For people that want 4K 120, you can find one of those dummy HDMIs instead. You're going to want to buy this before starting the guide. However, if you're running dual monitors already, Skip to that section of my guide and watch that part first before doing this, as I did run into a lot of issues when I was using dual monitors plus a dummy HDMI. But either way, the dummy HDMI is cheap enough that it might be worth a shot. We'll talk about setting all of this up in just a little bit. Now, if you head back into Moonlight and you click your computer, you'll notice that I have different icons here, but you likely only have desktop and maybe Steam. For the most part, you're basically set up from a working perspective. You could go in, manually click and open games as if it was a remote desktop, and it all should work. So the next parts of this guide will just focus on tweaks and getting the dummy HDMI set up properly. Now, you might notice that your monitors aren't turning off while you're using Sunshine and Moonlight. And on top of that, your games and everything aren't using the dummy HDMI monitor, it's only using the main monitor you normally use, or vice versa. This is where things get a bit more tricky. Like I mentioned before, when I was running dual monitors, this setup didn't work properly. So this part of the guide is going to be very advanced and expert. There were many times where my monitors would just not turn back on, and I had to remote into my PC to re-enable the monitor. Otherwise, sometimes unplugging the dummy HDMI would work. So if that scares you, I'm going to say it again. If you're not experienced in computers at all, stay away from this part. Or at the very least, set up remote desktop before attempting it. If you're choosing not to use a dummy HDMI and plan on leaving your main monitor on while gaming, you can skip to the resolution automation section. However, I will say that since swapping to a single monitor and using the dummy HDMI, I've had zero issues at all. But again, your mileage might vary. Now, the dummy HDMI is completely necessary for this entire guide. As I mentioned before, it's super necessary in this section too, as your monitor just won't turn off if a game is playing. So that's why we're going to be offloading the games to the dummy HDMI, so your monitor can turn off and save power, as well as just not cause burn-in if you happen to use an OLED monitor like I do. Plus, the dummy HDMI gives us perfect 1080p 60, which is what you want for most devices, like the Odin 2. So let's go ahead. You'll want to head to the MonitorSwapAutomation GitHub page, and that's in the description, and you can follow the README instructions there. It's extremely easy to follow, and it has everything you would need. I'm not going to be showing this part as I literally just followed it exactly word for word on that page, so I expect anybody can do this here. However, if you are using the dual monitors and a dummy HDMI, I would pay attention to the troubleshooting section with the workaround method, as that's what I had to do. Like I said, it still didn't work for me, but it might work for you. So what happens after you do all of this? Well, while streaming, it disables your main monitor, and it enables your dummy HDMI. So it's perfect, exactly what we want. When you exit streaming, it disables your dummy HDMI, so you can't move windows accidentally over, and it enables your main monitor again. So back to your normal setup. And so that's great and all, but what if you have devices with different resolutions and frame rates? For example, my Odin 2 does 1080p 60, but my Steam Deck OLED does 800p 90. So how do we account for different use cases like that? Because right now the Steam Deck would have a very bad time under this setup. For that, we want the resolution and monitor refresh rate to automatically swap when a device connects to it. And it's going to swap to whatever we set on the device, and then swap back to our default monitor resolution and refresh rate, as if nothing happened and we're done streaming. For this, we're going to need to head to GitHub again, and this time the resolution automation page, which again is in my description. Same as before, follow the steps to the letter, as it's extremely easy instructions here. This is going to be a must for anybody using multiple devices for Moonlight. Otherwise, if you're just doing one device at 1080p 60, you can basically skip this as the dummy HDMI has that resolution already. Next up on tweaks is giving you that console experience. For example, when I click to load in through the Playnite shortcut, Playnite pops up automatically, and now it's just like I'm using a console device. I click my game and it launches, and I never have to see the Windows desktop. To exit a Playnite stream, I personally use the swipe up from the bottom to get to the 3-button navigation and touch the back button. Then you want to tap on the shortcut that you use to jump into your PC, so the Playnite icon, and you can click Quit Session to properly exit the session. The other option is the hotkey of Start, Select, LB, and RB, and that should work too. So that's the workflow and how it all works. You might have noticed a few things. First, since you don't have Playnite, using the desktop sucks for launching games, and streaming stats don't show you the frame rate of the game at all, only the streaming information. So let's tackle these two things. Let's start with Playnite first. So as you saw, Playnite auto loads when streaming starts. It won't close when streaming ends, but you can close it manually with only using the controller, and then exit Moonlight like I showed before. I'll leave a link in the description to how to install Playnite and all of that, which is an awesome front end, but for those that want the same functionality, we're going to be heading to Applications in Sunshine, and we're going to add new and call it Playnite. Then under Detached Commands, you want to enter the path to the full screen app, and then make sure to click the plus sign on the right. Mine is on the E drive, so you can see what the path looks like here. It all depends on where you installed Playnite. You can leave the rest as default and click Save. Now, when you boot into Moonlight, you'll see an option for Playnite, and when you boot into it, it'll launch Playnite for you. It's pretty awesome, and it's necessary for a console-like streaming experience. But we can take this a step further as well. Let's say you wanted to stream, but you also wanted to see the on-screen Riva Tuner display to show your frame rate and all of that. But sometimes you don't want that either. There's tons of ways to do this, but here's one that I do. And again, I'm not going to go over how to install Afterburner or Riva Tuner, as that's outside of this guide, but you're going to need both of those to proceed in this section. Download AutoHotkey version 2.0. I'll have a link in my description. Then just open Notepad and you want to input the following. Then save that file as show_osd.ahk. Then do the exact same thing again, and this time enter the following. This time save it as hide_osd.ahk. What we're doing here is setting up hotkeys to show and hide the on-screen display, which we can call from Moonlight. Open up Riva Tuner, head to Setup, Plugins, Hotkey Handler, and set on-screen display to Alt plus Insert, and hide on-screen display to Alt plus Home. Click OK, and make sure the checkmark is enabled next to Hotkey Handler. If you pull up the main Riva Tuner page and try both hotkeys, you can see the toggle swap on and off to make sure it works. Now, let's head back to Sunshine, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing we did for Playnite, so same detached command and everything, but we're going to add a do and undo command as well. I'm going to call this application show_osd. Then for the do command, put the full path in quotes to your show_osd.ahk file. And then the same for the undo command for the hide_osd.ahk file. Do all of this over again and name it hide_osd. Then for the do command, put the hide_osd.ahk path, and for undo, put the hide_osd.ahk path. Save. Now, boot up Moonlight and you can test them both. Try Show OSD and boot up a game, and you should see the display pop up top right. Back out of Moonlight and try the Hide OSD, and it should disappear. It's handy for easily swapping between the two. As a last bit of information, I'm going to just show you the settings that I have in Sunshine. I'm almost certain that everything is default still, except for maybe 2-pass mode, which I set to slower, and I don't even remember the reason why. Honestly, you can leave everything as default. Also, the settings for the NVIDIA encoder, Intel encoder, AMD encoder, and software encoder all depend on what type of graphics card you're using. I'm using an NVIDIA RTX 3080, so the NVIDIA encoder is the only tab that matters to me. If you're using a different brand or a different model or no card at all, the other tabs would be where your settings would be. But just to help you, you can basically ignore every tab unless you run into a specific issue, as that's what I've done. That's going to be it for this one. This was a very long video, but I'm hoping that it helped you set up Sunshine and Moonlight and gave you some tweaks to help make that experience a bit better. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.